Two 5-year-old twins were left on an airport bench without a kiss, without a glance back, without a single word of goodbye, dropped there like they had never belonged to anyone at all. Their stepmother simply walked away, and the only man who stopped in the middle of that crowded terminal was the last one anyone would ever expect. The most feared man in Chicago. What did Riker Steele see in those two small children that made him forget, for the first time in 15 years, exactly who he was? This is the story of two little hearts that needed a home, and a man with dangerous hands who discovered that some things are far more powerful than anything money or fear can buy. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss a story, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're listening from.
The terminal at O'Hare was the kind of place that swallowed people whole. Gate after gate, corridor after corridor, a river of strangers pulling suitcases and checking phones and moving with the mechanical urgency of people who had somewhere to be. Nobody looked at anyone for more than a second. Nobody stopped. That was the nature of airports. Everyone was already somewhere else in their mind. Riker Steele moved through the crowd the way he moved through every room. Slowly, deliberately, with the certainty of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to change the air in a space. His detail flanked him at a distance, suits pressed, eyes cataloging every face without appearing to look at any. Riker carried nothing. Platinum blonde hair slicked back, ice blue eyes moving without urgency across the departures board. His flight to New York had been delayed 40 minutes. He had no opinion about that. He was walking toward the private lounge at the end of the terminal when he saw her. A woman in a beige coat, designer bag on one arm, moving fast toward gate 17. That in itself was nothing. But what was behind her? That stopped him. Two small children, barely 5 years old, a boy and a girl with the same curly blonde hair and the same wide blue eyes, stumbling to keep up with her. The boy clutched a stuffed bear against his chest with both arms. The girl held his hand. Neither of them was talking. They were just running, silently, trying not to fall behind. Riker stopped walking. His detail stopped 2 beats after him. Marco, his closest man, stepped up beside him without a word. The woman reached a row of black seats near the gate and turned. She said something to the children. Her voice didn't carry over the terminal noise. She pointed at the bench. The boy looked up at her with something in his face that Riker recognized from a long time ago. The specific, careful expression of a child who has learned that asking questions costs something. He sat. The girl sat beside him, pressing close to her brother, their small shoulders touching. The woman looked at them for exactly 1 second. Then she turned and walked toward the gate agent without looking back. She handed over her boarding pass. She went through the door. She was gone. Riker didn't move. He watched the 2 children on the bench. The boy's grip on the bear tightened. The girl looked at the door her stepmother had walked through, then at her brother. She put both of her small hands over his and held them. Neither of them cried. They just sat there, very still in the middle of all that movement and noise, like 2 small stones at the bottom of a river. Nobody in that terminal stopped. Nobody looked twice. And yet, one man did. And that single decision was about to cost him everything he thought he had built himself to be. Marco spoke quietly beside him. "Boss, flight's been moved to the North Concourse." Riker didn't answer. The boarding door closed with a soft hydraulic sound. The girl's chin dropped. The boy turned his head slowly toward the window, and Riker saw his face in profile. He saw the moment the boy understood. It wasn't a scream or a collapse. It was quieter than that, and worse. The boy's face simply went very still. His bottom lip pressed against the top one, the way a child does when they are trying with everything they have not to cry in a place where no one will help them. Riker moved before he made a decision to move. Marco caught his arm, a light touch, questioning. Riker didn't stop. He crouched in front of the 2 children, his 6'2" frame dropping below their eye level for the first time in his adult life. Up close, they were even smaller. The girl's eyes, when they found his face, were the color of a winter sky just before snow. She didn't flinch, which surprised him. Most adults flinched. "Where's your mom?" he asked. His voice came out lower than intended, roughed down to something that wouldn't frighten them. The boy turned from the window, looked at Riker with those same winter eyes, then looked down at his bear. "She's not our mom," he said. Flat, factual, the particular weight of something said many times before with no expectation of changing anything. "Okay." Riker looked at the girl. "What's your name?" "Lily." She pointed at her brother. "That's Owen." "How old are you two?" "5, Owen said. "Both of us. We're twins." Riker sat down on the bench beside them. Not looming, just sat. His broad frame filled the space, black suit immaculate, gold cross-chain catching the terminal light. His men held a loose perimeter at a distance. "Is someone coming for you?" Riker asked. Lily shook her head slowly. Owen looked back at the window. The plane was beginning to push back from the gate. He watched it with the expression of someone watching something leave that was never coming back. His arms tightened around the bear. "Okay," Riker said again. He put his elbows on his knees and didn't reach for his phone and didn't say another word. He just sat there beside 2 abandoned children in the middle of O'Hare, and the 40-minute delay that had seemed like nothing began, quietly, to change everything. Marco crouched beside Riker with the practiced stillness of a man who had spent 12 years learning to read his boss's silences. The terminal hummed around them. "You want me to call airport security?" Riker looked at the children. Owen had stopped watching the plane. He was studying the pattern on the floor with the focused intensity of a child who has decided that if he concentrates hard enough on something small, the large thing won't be true. Lily was watching Riker. She had not looked away from his face since he sat down, which was unnerving in the specific way that children who see too much can be unnerving to men who are used to controlling what other people know about them. "Not yet," Riker said. Marco straightened without comment. That was one of the things Riker valued most about him, the absence of unnecessary words. Riker turned to Lily. "Is there someone we can call? A grandparent? An uncle?" Lily thought about it with the serious concentration of a 5-year-old approaching a math problem. "Grandma Rose," she said, "but she lives very far." "Owen, do you know Grandma Rose's number?" Owen didn't look up from the floor. Daddy knew it. The word landed in the conversation, and both children flinched around it simultaneously. A small, reflexive tightening they probably didn't even know they were doing. Riker filed that away and didn't ask about it. Not yet. "Are you hungry?" he asked instead. Owen looked up for the first time with something other than emptiness in his face. It was a cautious expression. The expression of a child who has been disappointed enough times by offers that didn't follow through that he doesn't allow himself to want things immediately. He glanced at Lily. Lily gave the smallest nod. "A little bit," Owen said carefully. Riker stood. He held out his hand, palm up, not grabbing, not insisting. Just an offer. Owen looked at it for 3 full seconds. Then he shifted his bear to one arm and put his small hand in Riker's. Lily slid off the bench and took Marco's hand before Marco even processed what was happening. Marco, who had exactly 0 experience with children, and stood there for a moment looking as though a small animal had climbed onto him unexpectedly. Riker led them to the private lounge at the end of the terminal. His credentials opened the door without discussion. Inside it was quiet, carpeted, with low lighting and a long table near the window with food laid out. Sandwiches, fruit, small pastries. He sat them at the table and slid plates in their direction, and watched Owen eat 3 small sandwiches with the focused, grateful speed of a child who has not always been sure there would be food. That detail settled in Riker's chest like a stone. A child who eats fast because he isn't sure the food is real. If you've ever loved a child, any child, You know exactly what that does to you." While they ate, he stepped to the corner and made 2 calls. The first was to a woman named Gloria at the city records office, who owed him a favor she had been repaying for 4 years. He gave her the children's names and asked for everything. The second was to his attorney, Bernard Holt, who answered on the first ring. "2 children," Riker said quietly. "Abandoned at O'Hare. What can I do legally? What I can't?" "Riker, child services is the standard. I know what the standard is. Tell me the rest." A pause. "I'll make some calls." When he returned to the table, Lily had organized her food into a careful arrangement by color, which she seemed satisfied with, but had not yet eaten. Owen had fallen asleep sitting up. His forehead resting on his forearm on the table, the bear crushed against his chest. The sight of it, the specific vulnerability of a sleeping 5-year-old who had cried himself out past the point of tears, did something to Riker that he didn't have a name for and didn't try to find one. He sat across from Lily. She looked at him over her color-sorted food. "Are you a policeman?" she asked. "No." She considered this. "Are you a good man?" He met her winter sky eyes. The question sat in the air between them without apology. Lily waited for the answer with the patience of someone who already suspected it was complicated and had decided to ask anyway. Riker Steele, who had built an empire on fear and silence, who had never once in his adult life been asked that question by someone he couldn't deflect or dismiss, opened his mouth and found that he had nothing to say. He closed it again. Lily watched him. Then, apparently deciding that the silence was its own kind of answer and that she had other priorities, she picked up a strawberry and ate it. "Owen is scared of the dark," she said, as though this were information he needed. "He doesn't like to say so, but if the light goes off, he holds my hand." Riker looked at the sleeping boy. "I'll remember that," he said. His phone buzzed. "Gloria, already." He read the message once and then read it again. Then he set the phone face down on the table and sat very still for a moment, looking at nothing. The children's last name was Callahan. Thomas Callahan had died 11 weeks ago. Construction accident on the south side. A scaffold collapse that the city inspector's report called unavoidable, which was the word bureaucrats used when the truth was more complicated than the paperwork could hold. He had been 31 years old. He left behind no savings, a modest apartment on Halstead Street, and 2 5-year-old twins who had his eyes. Riker knew this because he had Gloria's report on his phone and because, in the back of a memory he had never once revisited by choice, he knew the name Thomas Callahan, the way you know the name of the person who pulled you out of something you were not supposed to survive. 7 years ago, on a January night on the southwest side, Riker's car had gone off an overpass in an ambush meant to end his career and his life simultaneously. The vehicle caught fire before it hit the embankment. He had been pinned by the door, conscious. Watching the fire work toward him with a calm efficiency he had since come to recognize as the feeling of something that has already decided how it ends. The man who reached through the flames and pulled him out, a young mechanic working late in the body shop across the road, who hadn't calculated the risk before he ran, was Thomas Callahan. Riker had offered him money that night. Thomas refused. He stood in the cold with burns on his forearms and said simply, "Just do right by the world sometime. That's all." Then went back inside. Riker had never forgotten him. He had checked on him twice over the years through channels Thomas didn't know existed. Thomas had married, had the twins, lost his wife to illness when the children were 2. Remarried a woman named Diana Harlow, clean record, cold face in the one photograph Gloria had found, who had decided 11 weeks after Thomas's death that 2 5-year-olds were an inconvenience she was no longer willing to manage. Riker sat with this information while Owen slept and Lily drew shapes on her water glass. The fact of it, the way Thomas Callahan's one selfless act had sent its consequence forward through 7 years to land here, in the shape of 2 small blonde children with winter sky eyes, sat in him like something heavy and unasked for, the way debts do when you have tried to forget them. He called Bernard again. Father's dead. 11 weeks. Paternal grandmother, Rose Callahan, Portland. I need her number. And everything on Diana Harlow. He stayed in the lounge that night, his New York flight canceled and rebooked without a thought. Owen woke disoriented 2 hours after falling asleep and grabbed for Lily before his eyes were fully open, and Lily took his hand without looking up from the drawing she'd been making on a cocktail napkin. A house with a large tree and 2 stick figures with circles for heads, and in the corner, a third figure, much taller, that she had not explained. Riker ordered dinner. Owen ate quietly, occasionally addressing the bear in a low murmur. Not quite speech, more like reassurance. The way children talk to the things they have decided are safe when the world has taught them that most things aren't. At some point, Owen looked across the table at Riker with sudden directness. My dad had a picture, he said, in his wallet, of a car that was on fire. Riker's hands were still on the table. Did he? He said the man in the picture saved his arms. Owen looked at Riker's hands, at the tattoos across his knuckles, at the diamond rings, at the faint older scars. He said the man had big hands, and a gold cross. He looked at the chain visible at Riker's collar, his brow furrowed in the effortful way of a child working something out. Are you that man? The room was very quiet. Riker looked at the boy for a long moment. Thomas Callahan had saved his life and said, do right by the world. 7 years later, his 5-year-old son was asking if he was the right man. The weight of the universe presenting its bill in this particular shape was not lost on him. Your father saved my life, Riker said. A long time ago. Owen processed this solemnly, then picked up his bear and placed it on the table between them, facing Riker, as though making a formal introduction. This is Captain, he said. He goes everywhere with me. Good name, Riker said. Are you going to leave us too? The question had no drama in it, just the flat, practical tone of a child who has already built a philosophy around the answer being yes, and is simply checking for confirmation. Riker felt something in his chest tighten in a way that was entirely outside his experience. Not tonight, he said. It was the truest thing he knew how to give. 2 words. Not a promise of forever, not a guarantee of anything. Just tonight, and for 2 children who had learned to ask for nothing at all. Tonight was everything in the world. Lily looked up from her napkin drawing without lifting her head. Just her eyes. She looked at him, then at Owen, then went back to drawing. On the napkin, she added a roof to the tall figure's outline. She drew it very carefully, pressing harder with the pen than the napkin probably needed. By morning, Bernard had the outline of Diana Harlow in legal terms, and it was not a complicated picture. Her bank accounts showed a pattern that suggested she had married Thomas Callahan 14 months ago with a specific interest in the life insurance policy he had taken out 3 years prior. A policy worth $240,000, payable to his spouse in the event of accidental death. The payout had been processed 8 weeks ago. Diana had not contested the scaffold report. She had accepted the payment, paid 3 months of back rent on the Halsted Street apartment, and begun making arrangements for a life in Miami that did not include 2 5-year-old children. The children themselves had no legal guardian beyond her. Rose Callahan, Thomas's mother, had not been formally named in any document. She was 71, had a hip replacement scheduled for the following month, and when Riker's call reached her at 6 a.m. Pacific time, she answered with the voice of a woman who had been waiting for bad news long enough that she had learned to receive it upright. Riker told her what he knew. There was a silence on the line that had texture to it, grief compressed and held. Then Rose said, Are they safe right now? Yes. Are you? Who are you? He considered how to answer that. I knew their father, he said. He did something for me once. I'm returning it. Another silence. Thomas never told me he knew anyone like... She stopped. Started again. I'm coming. I can be on a flight by noon. I'll arrange the flight, Riker said. He paused. Mrs. Callahan, when you arrive, there may be police involvement. Diana filed a report this morning claiming the children were taken from the airport without her consent. The silence this time was different. Harder. She left them on a bench, Rose said. Yes. I want that woman to answer for what she did. She will, Riker said. I'll make sure of it. He ended the call and turned back to the lounge where Marco had been sitting with Owen and Lily for the past hour, with the constrained expression of a man who has been asked to do something completely outside his training. Owen was showing Marco how to make Captain the Bear do a sitting-down bow, which required Marco to manipulate the bear's arms with instructions being delivered in a tone that suggested Owen had very particular standards for this maneuver. Marco was complying with the careful attention he normally reserved for threat assessments. Lily was watching with the quiet approval of a director satisfied with a rehearsal. Riker had 40 minutes before his attorney arrived. He spent 7 of those minutes standing at the window of the lounge looking at the tarmac, thinking about Thomas Callahan and a January night and the specific weight of a debt that was never asked to be repaid. The police arrived before Bernard did, 2 officers from the airport's security division, accompanied by a woman from the city's child welfare department. A brisk, practical woman named Susan Park, who had the manner of someone who processed complicated situations quickly. She introduced herself to Riker with the careful assessment of a professional deciding in real time how much authority this particular man actually represented. The children are inside, Riker said. They're safe. They've eaten. I've been in contact with their paternal grandmother, who is flying in from Portland. My attorney will be here in 20 minutes. Susan looked at him. And you are? Someone who was at the right gate at the right time. She catalogued him. The tattoos, the suit, the quality of stillness that had nothing relaxed about it, and made her calculations. The stepmother has filed a report saying the children were taken by an unknown male. The gate has cameras, Riker said. They've had cameras for 20 years. Whatever those cameras show is what happened. Susan looked at him once more, then went inside to see the children. Owen, upon her arrival, decided immediately that he didn't like her, which he communicated by sitting as close to Riker as physically possible when Riker came back in and gripping the arm of his chair. Lily was more measured. She answered Susan's questions politely and in full sentences, and when Susan asked about Diana, Lily folded her hands and said, in a voice that was careful and precise and utterly devastating, she always made food for herself. We ate after. The room was very quiet after that. 7 words, spoken by a 5-year-old girl, and they landed in that room like a sentence no judge had ever pronounced. Susan wrote something down. She did not look up immediately. When she did, her professional composure was entirely intact and her eyes were not. Bernard arrived with the camera footage already subpoenaed. Diana Harlow was, at that moment, in Miami. The footage was unambiguous in the specific way that only airports can produce. 43 seconds of a woman leading 2 children through a terminal, sitting them on a bench with a single gesture that did not include touching them or crouching to their level or any visible word of explanation, and walking away without looking back. 43 seconds. It was a short amount of time for the kind of decision it contained. Bernard walked Susan Park and the 2 officers through the documentation, with the methodical efficiency of a man who had been untangling complicated situations for Riker for 11 years, and had learned to build cases the way architects build load-bearing structures, with nothing unnecessary and nothing missing. Diana's bank records. The life insurance timeline. The Miami apartment lease, signed 6 weeks before Thomas Callahan's death, which was a detail that stopped the room. Her search history showed costs for international relocation and private school enrollment fees in 3 countries, none of which included 2 children in the calculations. Susan Park sat with the documents in her lap for a long time. She planned this, she said finally. It was not a question. For at least 8 months, Bernard said, possibly from before the marriage. Riker was standing at the window again. In the glass's reflection, Owen leaned against Marco's shoulder, with his eyes half closed. Marco had apparently become acceptable. Lily was cross-legged on the carpet, drawing on a full sheet of paper, materials sourced by one of Riker's detail without being asked, which said something about what the last 18 hours had done to the room's general priorities. Susan made her calls. The Miami police contacted Diana Harlow at her new apartment at 2 p.m. She denied everything for approximately 4 minutes. Then, when informed of the footage, said it was a misunderstanding. Then she stopped talking and asked for a lawyer. The false report charge was added to the abandonment charge at 4 o'clock, and Bernard leaned back in his chair with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose work is architecturally sound. Rose Callahan landed at 5, a small woman with white hair and Thomas's eyes, the same blue but older, weathered by a year that had taken her son, and was apparently not finished. When she came through the lounge door, Owen was across the room before anyone processed that he had stood up. He hit her at waist height, and she bent over him and held on. And the sound she made was not a word. It was the specific sound of someone arriving somewhere they were afraid they would never reach. Lily walked over more slowly, waited her turn with quiet dignity, and then Rose held both of them at once and cried without apology. Riker watched from across the room. He had moved to stand near the door, which put the maximum amount of space between himself and what was happening without leaving it. Marco came to stand beside him, and for a while neither of them said anything. "You're going to stay involved," Marco said. It was not a question. Riker said nothing. "You understand what that requires." "I know what it requires." Outside, a plane lifted off the runway and rose into the late afternoon sky until it was a small silver shape against the cloud. Riker watched it go. Rose, when she had steadied herself, looked up and found him across the room. She crossed the space between them and extended her hand. "You're the one who called me." "Yes. Thomas told me about you," she said. "Not your name. He didn't know your name, but he told me about that night. He said he'd pulled a man out of a car, and the man had tried to give him money and he wouldn't take it." Her voice caught briefly and came back. "He said he hoped the man turned out to be worth saving." The room was quiet. Lily, who had followed her grandmother across the room, looked up at Riker. Owen came and stood beside his sister. They stood there, the two of them, looking at him with those identical winter sky eyes. Riker looked at Rose. "What do you need?" he asked. "To take care of them. Whatever it is." Rose looked at him for a long time with the eyes of a woman who has learned to read what people actually mean rather than what they say. "Right now I need them home," she said, "and I need to know they're safe." "Both of those," Riker said, "I can do." Owen reached out and took 2 fingers of Riker's left hand. Not his whole hand, just 2 fingers. The way a very small child holds on when they want contact, but aren't ready to ask for it fully. He didn't say anything. He just held on. Riker looked down at the small grip around his fingers and stood very still. The way you stand when something fragile has landed on you, and you have decided that whatever it costs to keep still, you will pay it. The arrangements took 4 days. Rose Callahan would have formal guardianship, supported by a trust, set up in the children's names, funded without Rose needing to know the source, covering the Portland house, their education, everything a grandmother with a fixed income and a hip replacement could not carry alone. Diana Harlow faced 2 felony charges in Miami. Bernard had ensured the district attorney's office had every document organized and delivered without delay. On the 5th morning, Rose and the children had a flight to Portland at 11. Riker arrived at 9:30. He told himself it was to confirm the arrangements. Marco, who had 12 years of experience reading the difference between what Riker said and what was true, said nothing, and drove him there without comment. Owen was in the lounge with Captain the Bear, tucked under one arm, and a new backpack that had appeared overnight. Blue, with small airplane patches on the front pockets. Lily had her own, yellow, and she wore it with the expression of someone who intends to take it seriously. Rose was going through the paperwork Bernard had messengered over, reading each page carefully in the way of someone who does not sign things without understanding them. Owen saw Riker first. He crossed the room at a run, and what happened next was that Riker Steele, who had not been embraced by another human being outside of a professional context in approximately 9 years, found himself crouched on one knee with a 5-year-old boy's arms locked around his neck and a stuffed bear pressed against the side of his face. He put one large hand on Owen's back. He felt the boy's ribs through his shirt, small and light and alive. He held on. When Owen pulled back, his face had the wide-open look of a child, past the point where pride matters. "Will you come visit us?" he asked. "In Portland?" "Yes," Riker said. Owen studied his face for 3 full seconds, the same standard he applied to everything he needed to believe. Then he gave a small nod, carrying the finality of a decision made and filed. He went back to his backpack. Lily came and stood in front of Riker with her hands clasped, the pose she adopted for important things. She held out a napkin folded into a neat square. He unfolded it carefully. The house, the tree, the 2 small stick figures. The tall figure in the corner with the roof added on the first night, pressed hard into the napkin. She had added 2 lines since, arms reaching toward the smaller ones. "That's for you," Lily said. "So you remember." He folded it with the same care she had and placed it inside his jacket, against his chest. "I'll keep it," he said. Her steady eyes stayed on him. "You're a good man," she said, "even if it's complicated." He had no answer for that. He accepted it the way you accept a verdict delivered with complete accuracy. In silence. A 5-year-old girl looked at the most dangerous man in Chicago and saw straight through to the truth, even the complicated kind. The flight was called. Rose gathered the children with the practiced efficiency of a woman who knows how quickly gates close. At the door, she paused and looked back at Riker. "Thomas would have liked you," she said. "I think he already did, in a way. He just didn't know your name yet." Riker stood. He watched them go through the door. Rose first, then Owen, then Lily, who stopped in the doorway and turned and raised one small hand in a wave that was dignified and deliberate and completely final. He raised his own hand. She turned and went through the door. He stood in the empty lounge for a while. Marco was outside. His flight to New York had been rebooked 3 times now and was departing in 90 minutes, and none of that seemed to matter very much. He took the folded napkin from his jacket and looked at it once, at the tall figure in the corner with the roof drawn over it and the arms reaching down, and then put it back. He had not built anything in the shape of care in 15 years. He had built other things, empires, boundaries, distances. He was good at all of those, apparently not immune to this. He walked out into the terminal and the crowd closed around him, and he moved through it the way he always moved, slowly, deliberately. But something in the quality of his stillness had shifted by degrees that only a person watching very carefully would notice. Something had come in through the crack that 2 small people with winter sky eyes had opened, simply by being exactly as unguarded and as worth protecting as they were. Outside the windows, the sky was open and very blue, and somewhere above it, a plane was climbing toward Portland with 2 children who had been left on a bench, a grandmother with Thomas Callahan's eyes, a yellow backpack, a blue backpack, and Captain the Bear, who went everywhere. He had told Owen he would visit. That was the one thing, across all the years and all the decisions, that had always been true about him. He kept his word.
If this story touched your heart, hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss a story, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're listening from.